Hello beauty therapists, and welcome to another video. And tonight we are going to be talking all about impaired skin barriers, and specifically how you as the beauty therapist can tell if your client has an impaired skin barrier. My goodness, this is so important. I really hope that that you're excited to learn about this, because it's not only going to help you if you're a skin therapist, but it's going to help if you're any other classification of beauty, including hair removal, including lash and brow treatments, including tanning, makeup. It is everything that we do. As beauty therapists, we work on the aesthetics, right? And a lot of the time, these aesthetic enhancements actually are touching the skin. It's like our outermost casing. So we need to really need to know when the barrier of our skin, or our client's skin in specific, is actually impaired. So this video was inspired by, there was a thread that was going on in this group, and the discussion came up about someone waxing their client, and then there was a whole, there was a open wound essentially. And not to say that this was due to an impaired barrier, but my point of doing this video was to just educate you all, to make sure you're limiting the chances of you potentially damaging your client's skin or making a bad decision essentially because you didn't know how to recognize an impaired barrier. So I am coming on here today to talk to you about this and lecture you through this really important topic. And I have to admit to you all right now that this is something that took me time to actually visually diagnose and to visually understand. It's not just seeing what an impaired skin barrier looks like. You really need to understand the workings of the skin from a skin science perspective. So I want to rehash everything today and give you the skills to be able to start recognizing when a skin is impaired, right? And when I'm talking about a barrier, I'm talking about your acid mantle, or the more technical term, your hydrolipidic film. So again, this is paramount to everything we do. And sometimes you might not be noticing a skin is, maybe if you do know what impaired skin barrier looks like, sometimes there are other little things that you might not be accustomed to seeing, which means an impaired barrier. So let's get into it. That's enough of the pre. Excuse me. I just had my dinner. I munched it down really quickly before coming on here. That's better. So I do encourage you, since this is a live video, I'd love for you to ask questions throughout. You know, this is your chance as the beauty therapist to get some get some tutoring or mentoring from me. This is what I do. This is my livelihood in my clinic. Every single client who comes in, specifically, well, every client, but I treat a lot of acne, rosacea, and a lot of impaired barriers. And every single one of these case studies, or clients with these skin conditions, I am fixing their barrier first. It's the first thing I do. So I'm really excited to chat about this, and I might not have all the answers, but I tell you what, there is so much out there. So I'm going to give you a lot of useful resources as well. So to those of you who are watching, hello Emily and hello Jen, please let me know you can hear me. That's always good. And I'll jump straight into it. Excuse me. So I have a couple of resources here that I would love for you as the viewer to look into purchasing and using in your clinic. So if you haven't heard of her yet, I'm sure you're going to be obsessed, but the lovely Florence Barrett Hill, she has been around for quite some time as an educator on skin, and I really do rely on her information. So what I have here is on my laptop, thank you Emily, on my laptop I have the Advanced Skin Analysis textbook, which comes in a bundle with the cosmetic ingredient analysis. It comes in a bundle with a cosmetic ingredient textbook, so I highly suggest you purchase that. It has been my Bible here in the clinic. And I've also got her companion books, this is a really helpful one. I know a few of you have asked about this. This is the Aesthetic Clinicians pictorial guide. I can read backwards. Yeah, lots of great images of the skin. This is my favorite page, and I always get it out to talk to my clients about the top layer of their skin, their epidermis. And this is the companion book to the essentially the advanced skin analysis. So it goes into more detail and shows you a bit of photos, and it basically repeats the information but in a handy way. So excuse me. Alrighty, so wonderful. I shouldn't have ate all my food so quickly. Oh, bear with me. All right, so what is your acid mantle? We're going to do a really quick rehash of what your acid mantle, your lipid barrier, your hydrolipidic film actually is. So you've probably heard it before. People say you've got to keep the skin at a certain pH because you don't want to impair the barrier. And this is true because when we take the skin away from its natural pH, which is somewhere around 5.5, we're then disrupting things for the skin barrier. And what this does when the pH is wrong, it just means that certain enzymes in the skin that regulate the skin barrier just aren't functioning. So we need to keep it at that optimum pH. And this means, you know, not having, I think it's over now. Oh, wow. So it's about having cleansers that don't strip the skin, right? And you've probably heard that analogy before, but essentially your barrier, it covers your whole body, and from different areas of the body, it's a little bit different, right? And this barrier is invisible. You can't really tangibly hold it. It's a really thin coating over your whole body, which essentially is your skin's first line of defense. Now, I'm going to let you know now, if you don't know the lines of defense for your skin, what is the second line? What is the third? What is the fourth? What is the fifth? You really need to find this out, especially if you're working with skin. You can probably get away with it if you're in things like makeup and lash and brow tinting, but if you're treating skin, you need to know the defense, all the lines of defense. So your barrier is your first line of defense. So it's like the guards, you know, if there's any invasion, it's the first thing that protects you. So remember, your skin is your body's largest organ. It is literally the interface between you, your inner organs, everything inside of you, and the environment. It plays such a vital role. And on top of your skin, on top of your stratum corneum, which is the top layer of the epidermis, you have this barrier. Again, it's invisible. So it's called a hydrolipidic film because it is a water-oil mixture. So it is majority oil with a little bit of water, right? So it encases everything. And in this hydrolipidic film, well, what is kind of not in it, but essentially living with it is a whole host of bacteria. And I'm not sure if you've heard the quote, but we are more bacteria cells than we are our own human cells. Crazy when you say it like that, but it's true. We have more bacteria living on us, in colonizing in different areas of our body than we have actual human cells. So the bacteria, we have all these different strains of bacteria living on our skin barrier, and it actually is a really, really good thing. They're protecting you. They're your first line of defense. And just like your gut bacteria, your skin bacteria can become imbalanced. And you've probably heard it before, P. acne bacteria. I believe, I haven't done a bit of enough research, but I believe they've changed the name to C. acne. So yeah, if anybody knows a little bit of information on that and what kind of journal articles I can read on this, please send them my way, because I've heard a lot of people in the industry mention these C acnes rather than the P acne. So maybe there was some more research, but I digress. So that's where you've probably heard it, the bacteria imbalance, and we need to keep it, the good bacteria, essentially thriving and well. We need to keep it in homeostasis. Now, another quick little review. Do you know what homeostasis means? Essentially, it just means imbalance, and that's all the body is doing. So you have all these organs in our body, organ systems, and all they want to do is keep that balance. So our pH in our blood, it likes to be slightly alkaline, and every time we eat a whole sugary meal, it sends the blood alkaline a little bit more acid. And then what the body does, it wants homeostasis, it wants to stay the same. So it has all these modulators, you could say, which help the blood come back to a good pH. So that's just another example of pH and how the body is just marvelous at creating homeostasis. But that's essentially what you want to do with your skin. You want to create homeostasis, or at least give it an environment to let it do it itself. So what else do we have? It's so important. If you don't have a strong barrier, it means your skin is permeable. So you can kind of think of it like, a nice way to think about it is, funny, I have a glass of water. So a really cool analogy that I've seen before to talk about transepidermal water loss. And let me just rewind just a tad. So again, your skin barrier is mainly oil with a little bit of water, and essentially it's keeping your skin waterproof as well. So it's holding water in your skin. So we have a glass of water, and this analogy is to show you how transepidermal water loss, so transfers out of the skin, epidermal being the top layer, water loss. So I'm sure you're catching on here. So we have a glass of water, we put it outside on a hot day, like those 35-degree days, just like this, it'll evaporate very, very quickly. If we were to put oil on top of this, it'll evaporate much slower. You can think of your skin barrier just like this in terms of transepidermal water loss. So it is waterproofing for your skin, and when it is not intact, that means your skin is permeable. So all of the good things leave, which is water. We need water in our skin to function well. And we also have all the bad things coming in. It means our first line of defense is not functioning, and we need to get that back up. So that's pretty much your barrier in a nutshell. There's so much more to it, and I really recommend you get the Florence Barrett-Hill Advanced Skin Analysis book, do the Prestige training courses, do all the courses you can, read up scientific journal articles. There's so much out there, but let's get into how to actually recognize it on your client's skin. So I'm just going to quickly double check that we've got everything here. Oh, I thought I should mention as well, that's right. So you remember how I said about this good bacteria? It's a microflora, right? It's the same as your gut bacteria, it's a microflora, and this can go into dysbiosis. This is the word we used when we say it is imbalanced. So it's not in homeostasis, it's dysbiosis. So when it is in dysbiosis, those bad bacteria can become opportunistic, let's say. So they decide, oh, well, all the good bacteria has gone on holiday, so it's our time to take over. And unfortunately, being bad bacteria, or at least not so helpful bacteria in this circumstance, they do nasty things to the skin. And one of those, for an example here, is the Staphylococcus aureus. You've got all different types, and just depending on your ethnicity, everything, your cultural heritage, so many things, whether you were born out of the vagina or you were C-section, there's so many things that determine the bacteria that live on your skin. But anyways, we've got the Staphylococcus aureus, and what happens with this bacteria in specific, and I'm sure you can do a little bit more research on this if you wish, but essentially this bacteria, when the skin barrier is down, it takes over and it starts to actually latch onto lesions in the skin, and it starts to replicate, and it starts to cause this golden pus, and it crusts, and it just starts to spread. So this is just an example. This is probably one of the more severe types of bacteria that have become imbalanced, but it's just an example for you, and I've seen it a lot in the clinic. It's quite common, so something to look up in your spare time. I'm just jumping back to the textbook to make sure I don't miss anything, but I really want to teach you tonight how to recognize the skin barrier, because like I said, it took me time, it really did. And every day I get better at this as I look at new skin. So I think that is good. Yeah, so we're up to the diagnosing now. Alrighty, so what can you expect to see on an impaired barrier? I like to think of this on, there's a bit of a spectrum when it comes to impaired barriers, and it doesn't look the same on every single person. So As you know, there's a lot of different Fitzpatrick skin types, so different colors. And you probably noticed by now that the darker the skin type, it tends to look healthier, right? It looks more intact. It looks, it just looks sturdier, doesn't it? And they do tend to be sturdy skins. And I find these darker Fitzpatrick skins are actually harder to tell when there's an impaired barrier because of this. So let me go through everything. But essentially it's kind of on a spectrum. So you can imagine all the different Fitzpatrick skin types, all the degrees of how impaired a skin is, and how this manifests on different skins at different levels of impaired. So I hope you got me, you're listening here and you're following me. Please let me know if you're following. But essentially it's a spectrum and it won't just look the same. So I'm going to take a picture of, show you a picture of what a very, very severely damaged impaired barrier looks like. All right, so there are so many different diagnostic criteria here in this photo to really think about, but I really want to show you because this is a very damaged skin barrier. So let's come up nice and close. Can you see how red and irritated that skin is? We've got flaking of the skin, we've got incomplete corneocyte compaction, lipid peroxidation, icteriosis, I think it's called. Fissure, there's a fissure in this one. There's so many different little things, right? So that is a pretty extreme example, and that's when the skin has been left for a while. Then you've also got, I think I have one here. Here it is. Here's another one. This is another impaired barrier. But what I want to make sure that you know tonight is that you don't always just want to look for redness on the skin. Redness doesn't mean an impaired barrier. Erythema in the skin is not the only diagnostic criteria you want to look at. So they're just some examples, but I'm going to go through what you can kind of notice on the skin. So an impaired barrier, it looks different on everybody, but essentially it's a skin that you'll notice, the first thing you notice, you look at that skin, let's say you've cleansed it, right? And you're looking at that skin, and let me just show you a little tool actually. I'm in my clinic at the moment, and I just thought I'd quickly show you. This is the tool I use to look at the skin. This is really handy. This is the BT Gear from the BT Gear brand. Chuck it on here, really simple. Tighten it up. Got the light, and you can like position the light. And these are magnifying glasses. So this is what I use to look at the skin, and there's so many other tools out there. I really like this one because I got my hands free. But essentially you want to be looking at the cleansed skin and nothing on there, clean hands, and we're looking at it under the magnifying glass with some light. The first thing you want to do, I personally do, I look for secretions in the skin, and I'll just rewind just a tad. Florence Barrett Hill uses this great criteria for diagnosing the skin, and she breaks the skin up into 3 different levels: secretions, texture, and color. So I look at secretions first in most cases, and so when I'm looking at secretions, I want to feel what the moisture is like on someone's skin. I want to look for signs of oil and how big the pores are or how little the pores are. And so what I'm doing, the first thing I do, usually on the forehead, it's a really good indicator. So remember, we've just cleansed the skin, and you can feel the skin, and it almost feels, a little bit slippery. That's usually a good sign that they're getting a bit of transepidermal water loss, a little bit too much, and you can feel a little bit of oil in there coming out, but you've cleansed the skin, right? And it shouldn't really have much on there, but generally an impaired barrier, you have a little bit of a kind of moisture seeping out. It is so subtle, so subtle, but that's one thing that I look for. You also may or may not notice redness. There generally is redness, but it's just harder to tell in a darker skin. So it's this underlying redness in the skin. So it's not from blushing, because that is natural for some genetic skin types. It's like kind of like a patch, and kind of, it's usually across the cheeks and over the nose and through here and here. But you can have an impaired barrier without those indicators, right? So it doesn't have to be inflamed and red and hot. It can be pretty low grade and still have an impaired barrier. So look for that redness, and don't just assume that they've got beautiful rosy cheeks. Really look for it. If you see that there, it's usually a good sign. So another thing you want to look for is incomplete corneocyte compaction. I'm going to bring it up here, and that's a textural thing. So there we go. There's a couple of ways of noticing it, and I found it took a little bit for me to start noticing this one, but it's essentially corneocytes reflecting light. Can you see that? And it looks like wrinkles, but it's the cells are not compacting, so they're not squishing together in the right way, and there's space, and they're not healthy. So you'll sometimes see incomplete corneocyte compaction as well. And that can come in a lot of different ways as well. So that's just for another video. But let me jump back to impaired skin barrier. What else have we got here? So you'll notice the transepidermal water loss. You'll notice lipid peroxidation, which again is a whole nother video, but you can usually tell lipid peroxidation because the skin is slow to heal. You can see wounds that have just been there for a little while. Yeah, puffiness, that's a good sign. If you ever see, so puffiness could be due to the lymphatic system, but if you see kind of like raised almost in some areas, that's a pretty good sign there's an impaired barrier. That's probably a little bit more in the extreme end. If you've got extreme dryness, if you've got flaking of the skin, if there's any type of eczema, dermatitis, if there's acne, there is an impaired barrier. Acne is always paired with an impaired barrier. Why do you think the C. acne bacteria have overgrown? And essentially, I mean, yes, it's to do with the being plugged and the oil and the excess keratinization, but it's also to do with the barrier becoming impaired. They both play key roles. So essentially, I guess a good way to think about it is if there's a skin condition, there usually is an impaired barrier. But I really want you to be able to recognize it when it's on a client that doesn't look like they have much of a skin condition. Maybe they've got pigmentation and you wouldn't be picking up that there's an impaired barrier. So again, looking for that redness, looking for that incomplete corneocyte compaction, looking and feeling for those secretions. You can kind of feel the difference between a true oil flow and transepidermal water loss. It's more watery in texture. When I felt it, it feels really slippery on my finger, and I do this because it doesn't just, it slips off really, really well. And you can tell because a skin that is super dry, so it's a very lipid dry skin, and you can tell that through the size of their pores and all these other things on the skin. And they have a lot of oil on their skin. Well, it's probably, they say they've got a lot of oil and they can see a bit of a shine. It's almost like a gloss actually. That's a nice way of putting it. That is a sign of transepidermal water loss on a dry skin. Another sign of an impaired barrier is when you look at a skin and you can see blotchiness, right? So you're looking at the skin and you see an area of redness and kind of an area that's almost translucent. It doesn't look like clear skin. You can see mine, it is strong skin. I don't have makeup on, this is my skin. So it's tough, it's firm, and there's no translucency to it. You can see the oil from the day, but it's not gloss, it's not a full shine. And I have a fairly okay oil flow naturally, but it's not a gloss, a sheen over my skin. You can see this is healthy skin. It's not translucent, it's skin color and it is even. When you're looking at a skin and you can almost see, like, a lot of people will say it's uneven skin tone. It's an unhealthy skin. It's not a skin that's in a good condition. It's not in a good way. We need to balance it. So that is also a sign. Let's have a look here. A skin that is itchy. That's a really good one, because when our skin's first line of defense, remember that's your barrier, when the first line of defense is down, the next line has to kick in. And what this will do is heighten the skin's immune system. So signs of immune response in the skin are itchiness, it's redness, of course, hives, and kind of like little welts. You can notice that on an impaired barrier in some of the more severe cases, and this one is actually a really good example. Rosacea, it's a big one. Can you see those little bumps under the skin? It's an uneven surface texture. So whenever you have an uneven texture on the skin, there's probably an impaired barrier. You kind of get the point now. I'm just gonna, most of us have an impaired barrier, right? So these are just some ways to notice it, and you can't, there's a lot of things you have to be careful about when the skin is impaired. I hope that's enough. Please let me know if you have questions regarding this. I want to go into a little bit more detail about how this relates to the beauty therapist, and how in different professions you can think about how this could impact your client. So let's start with hair removal. This one's huge, because if you're doing waxing, what you're doing, you're removing the barrier, you're removing parts of the stratum corneum, and you're removing hair at the same time. You're actually impairing the skin quite a bit. So once you've done that, you are leaving the skin vulnerable. Why do you think you get the little pimples, you get the redness? It's a sign of trauma. So you've taken off the skin and the barrier and the hair. So if you're doing waxing on an impaired barrier, someone whose skin isn't so intact, and maybe you're trained and you know not to do a red and irritated skin, but maybe you're doing it on a skin that you didn't think maybe was impaired, but maybe they have a bit of acne on their face, but not much. Maybe it's not around the eyebrow area. It probably is impaired there. They'll have slower healing, and it won't be a nice thing. And this is when you can start removing too much skin, because again, it's a vulnerable skin and it leaves that skin open for trauma. So this is why I really, really like threading. It's very hygienic, and you're not actually ripping, well, I guess it really depends on the practitioner, but it's only taking the hairs, right? So that's what you need to be careful of. You don't want to be waxing a skin that's impaired in any shape or form. Now, also, you probably already heard about this, and I'm kind of reverting a little bit, but I'll come back to the different therapists. So you probably know about Accutane or Roaccutane or isotretinoin. That is the actual drug name, isotretinoin. And that is an over-the-counter oral vitamin A prescribed medication that is often prescribed for acne. Now, why do I bring this up? Because I want you to know that there are so many things that can impair skin, and I really think that's probably for another day. I'm realizing how long this is already taking. We talk all day about the skin barrier. But essentially, when you're taking isotretinoin, it stops the skin barrier from forming as well as it would. So you might not know that the skin barrier is deformed or impaired or not even able to repair at all. And you will only know this if a client actually says something about it. I have a client in my clinic here, and she is well educated. She's a lecturer at university. She sees me for skin treatment. She understands the drug that she's taking, so isotretinoin, and she even made the mistake of going to a waxer and not letting them know about the isotretinoin. What happened? Skin off. She said that hurt. and the therapist was like, well, what are you doing with your skin? What are you taking? She's like, oh, you know, Accutane. Oh, shit. Mind my language, but it's a bit of a no-brainer. But someone who is very well educated was seeing me for skin treatments. She understands what Accutane is. She's done the research. She understands pharmacological. She's an ambulance officer. She understands how medications work. She just had a bit of a brain fart. But people make mistakes, and you really, you know, it's a big one. You've really got to ask people, are you taking Accutane, isotretinoin, or Roaccutane? Sometimes you really need to just repeat it. So that can make a skin very impaired. So I digress. But lash and brow tinting, or I'm so out of touch with those other areas of beauty because I just specialize in skin now and massage that sometimes I forget all the names, but your lash lifts, your lash tints, your extensions, all of those, you might think that doesn't matter, but the thing is you can get an impaired barrier over the eyes as well, and you might not notice it straight away, or perhaps you're not even realizing that over the long period of time as your client comes to see you, you put that glue on, every single time maybe you use a really astringent cleanser to wipe away all the oil off the eye area, because you want to make sure it's clean and dry. And maybe over the period of 12 months, all of a sudden your client complains that they've got eczema on their eyes. Could have been prevented. So this is kind of a bad situation, and maybe because they've been getting lash extensions this whole time, they go, oh my god, well maybe it was the lash extensions, and maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. But you need to be able to tell the warning signs before it gets to eczema and dermatitis and peeling and them needing to see a doctor. So it really does affect it, because those chemicals you're putting on the skin, well, remember, if the skin barrier is not intact, it's more permeable, so things can go in, things can come out. All those chemicals, they're gonna cause a reaction. Maybe not the first time, maybe the second time, you don't know. So everyone's different, everyone's immune system is different. But essentially, you want to make sure a barrier is intact if you're doing tinting or something of that nature. We have makeup. This is huge. I'm sure if you're a makeup artist, you've looked at a skin and gone, oh, a healthy skin, and gone, wow, that makeup sits much nicer. You do it on an unhealthy skin, of course, it's not going to look as nice. So even though makeup might seem a little bit benign, and we always use it when we have not a nice skin underneath, we use it to make us feel more confident, right? But the thing is, you can actually be exacerbating the condition. Perhaps maybe you're a makeup artist and you're doing makeup on your clients, and you go to use a really nice micellar water, and then you use a facial wipe, and just the act of using those really harsh cleansing agents on the skin, you start to cause a bit of a reaction, or at least a heightened response in the skin. And then perhaps you go to put a primer on, which is full of not the best ingredients, and then you go to start layering on all these different bits and pieces, and they all have different chemicals going in and out of the skin. And what you might end up with is a client who comes back and says, my skin really broke out after that. And it could be from a plethora of reasons, but if you're putting makeup onto an impaired barrier, it's not going to be the best thing. Now, I know there's not really, well, I am trained in makeup, but I'm not a specialist in this area. I don't know what your protocols are about who you can apply makeup to or not, but what you should know is that if I know you are all amazing therapists, and you know that you should be doing a thorough sanitization of all your makeup products and all your brushes, but I'm going to just say it for the sake of this. Hello, Brooke. So if you are using the same makeup brush on the next person without cleansing it, and say that person you used it on is an impaired barrier, and let's just say that person, because of that bacteria's imbalance, that means that Staphylococcus aureus is actually a little bit more present. Perhaps you possibly could get it onto the makeup brush, and then you're going to use that makeup brush on the next person. They have a lesion in their skin. What's going to happen, and this is a real thing. There's a story out, I think 5 years ago, of a lady becoming paralyzed. This exact scenario. Similar scenario, and you apply it to that person's skin, they get a staph infection. Best case scenario, it's a staph infection on their face. Worst case scenario, like the story I just mentioned, is they become paralyzed, because what happened is the Staphylococcus aureus got into the spinal cord and actually paralyzed this poor girl. It wasn't to do with a makeup artist, it was two girlfriends. And the girl who became paralyzed from the waist down, I believe, she had kids. It was a terrible story, and it was the Staphylococcus aureus bacteria. It might have been a little bit in that same family of Staphylococcus aureus, but this is the reality of it, and this is really serious. So that's just an example of how makeup could go wrong. Hey, you might have a really busy day, and you might just skimp over these things, but one wrong decision, it could cost you so much if it comes back to you, at least. So let's talk about massage. Well, massage, it's going to come in the way with massage, because if you're massaging the face and perhaps you're using a oil that has a little bit of fragrance in it, you're probably going to cause irritation to an impaired barrier. Because what do we know about fragrance? Fragrance is irritating. Fragrance does nothing for your skin apart from damage it. I hope if anything you take away, take that on. You don't want fragrance in anything that touches your skin. It is sensitizing, it is not good. So you could be essentially inflaming your skin. I don't see how doing a massage on an impaired barrier would cause a lot of issues, but you might get a client complaint. You know, you might not even realize that someone's barrier is impaired on their legs, for example. They might have really dry skin and it's almost peeling and flaking with little bits of eczema, and you use this, perhaps you go for an essential oil blend and you go for something like pepper, ginger, you know, something really stimulating. You choose those essential oils based on perhaps the emotional stability of the person. You want to, you know, uplift them perhaps, and then, or maybe they enjoyed the scent, and then you apply that to an already impaired barrier. You're going to get a reaction of heat and all kinds of things. So that's another scenario. And just, you know, this can be so easily avoided by taking little tiny precautions of making things a little bit more soothing and a little bit more gentle, and perhaps avoiding certain areas. What else do we have in the beauty industry? I said makeup, lash and brow, hair removal, nails. So I guess it's not huge in the nail industry, but I'm sure you've seen girls with eczema and dermatitis around their hands. They absolutely have an impaired barrier. So again, you just want to be careful, because acetone, oh, that would burn if you had an impaired barrier. It's only going to worsen the situation. So that is another example. Now, beauty therapists, I think you get the idea. This has been a really long video thus far, and I'm very happy to come on here and talk about more on this topic, perhaps go into the science, more of the science, perhaps go into more understanding the epidermis. I'm not sure what you want to hear. Let me know, because I have to go. I just realized my battery is about to die and I think we have covered a really good amount tonight. So make sure that you do buy the Florence Barrett Hill companion books, and you purchase her textbooks. They have been a godsend for me in my practice, and even if you're not doing skin, it's so helpful. These weren't much at all. They don't cost that much. You can order them online. The textbook bundle is about $150, something along those lines. So thank you for being here with me. It really goes to show that when you tune into videos just like this, that you have what it takes to be an industry leader. And an industry leader makes sure that they're always up to date with information and always putting the health and the safety and the best interests of their client first. So thank you for being here, and stay on top of your game. I know you've got this. All right, see you beauty therapists. I'll see you soon.